Marcus said, my name is Miro Kazakoff. I see many familiar faces from our first two sessions, so I'm excited that it was valuable enough for you to join us again. We're going to talk today about funnels. Oh, sorry, my background. So I'm a professor of management communications over at the MIT Sloan School. I focus on data communications. My background prior to that, I was in sales and client service in a variety of roles. Started my career at Bain & Company. I've worked for a variety of startups, including HubSpot, a company that I co-founded, Tested, which we'll talk about today, and another one, Compete, that we'll talk about as well. Like I said, and I currently teach, so one of the things that I miss about my prior job was there's just a lot of work and exposure that I had when I was in sales, and a lot of skills that really valuably inform everything that I do now, so that I think are valuable skills for all professionals. But that also, when I started in the sales process, there was a bunch of ways in which it felt like this mystical process that was about art, and there was a type of salesperson, we called them the wink and point. So the wink and point is the person who goes, hey, to you. And I thought being good at sales was about being a wink and point. And I was really gratified over my career to learn that, no, there's actually a bunch of technique and things that you can do really mechanically that are critical parts of the sales process. They're actually part of how you succeed in it. And so this series is about exposing you to some of those. Today is a class a little less about sort of directly how do we get the sale, and a little bit more about sales management. And we'll start, since most of you are early stage founders, we'll use this concept to think about how you manage yourself. And so today is about funnels. And the funnel is a really fundamental concept in sales. So we're going to talk about what is a funnel. We'll talk about how you can better understand your funnel. And then finally, how should you think about using the funnel to manage your time and activities? So really fundamentally, the image of a funnel, you should all know, looks like that. Does someone want to take a stab at the very basic question of what is a sales funnel? It's both an easy concept and sometimes a little weird to understand. Let's take a stab at explaining what it is.
It's the process your, company goes through the different interactions with people, like services or sales and marketing.
Yep. Yeah, so the process that your company goes through with people who are prospective customers of your companies. One of the things that I want to push you on today is to shift it from this point of view of it's the activities that my company does into a focus on it is the process that a customer goes through when buying. Because what we're going to use the funnel for is eventually to move to the activities that your company does. But the place that it starts from is the process that the customer goes through. And the critical idea of it is a funnel. So dollars hopefully come out the bottom of this. And you have sort of prospects here at the top. And just conceptually, the reason why we use a funnel is that the idea of it is an idea that there are different stages, and that to go to any stage in it, a prospect must pass through every single stage beforehand. So again, we're just doing really basic conceptual stuff here. But the idea that you can't just hop in at one of these stages. That if you do, intellectually, what you want to think of a prospect as having done is they've just moved through these stages really fast. And it is possible that someone shows up and moves themselves right to pretty late in the process. They show up and they say, I'm ready to buy. It's great. It does not mean they haven't gone through their buying funnel. It just means a bunch of stages that you normally get to see, those all happened without you being able to see them. Which is why it's really important that we think about it from the point of view of what the customer goes through, rather than necessarily the actions that we're doing. I'm going to talk to you about some of the stages on the funnel, but just a few notes here. We're going to talk today about the sales funnel, which I'm roughly defining as the funnel at which you are talking to a prospective customer. in some sort of live way. That's a rough definition. But there's a whole other funnel, equally important, in many businesses more important, for instance in consumer businesses probably more important, that is a marketing funnel as well. And so the marketing funnel more theoretically starts with literally everyone in the world. And at the end of it generates leads. And for just language in here, we're going to use, when a lead turns into someone we're talking to from a sales point of view, we're going to start calling them a prospect. There's lots of different ways that you use language for this. I'm just going to use this one just so that we're consistent in here. There's not like a term that everybody uses, but it's just helpful to have one. So we're going to talk about this funnel here. And I'm going to turn it on its side, and I'm going to make it horizontal because it's a little easier to talk about when it's this way. And that this will be a little clearer here. Because there are some different ones. The thing that all funnels have is they all end with the close or the sale. Though even that you might disagree with, because you might say, oh, we do a bunch of marketing and sales to people after they become customers to upsell them and things like that. I'm going to suggest you think of that as yet again a different sales process and going into yet another funnel. But for this one, we're going to say that it ends at the sale. That's consistent across basically all funnels. Different funnels have different stages, but I'm going to go through a rough one to you today in a rough way that I think about it for what are the stages you see in almost every business. The last stage is the close. Prior to the close, and it is critical that you think of this as a different stage, is the verbal. The verbal is the stage at which someone says, I am going to buy. It is not the same stage as actually having bought. Almost everyone who is sold has the experience of why is it important to think of them as two different stages? Maybe someone has an experience here that could be helpful.
Yeah, well, they will say yes, but then when they review the paper, they will be like,
Yeah. So they say yes, and everyone remembers, everyone remembers the deal you lost on the verbal, especially the first one, where you'd mentally chalked it up as they said yes, and you thought, I have a sale. And then you learn no. Not only is there another stage, this is the most important stage, because this is the stage at which you should not be losing anyone out of your funnel. And so it is the most painful to lose them from. So this is the verbal. If you're going to think of this in terms of an action that you're trying to get the customer to do, I think of this as the getting the signature stage, or getting the credit card. So they've said yes, you need to get them to get the signature on the contract or to give them your credit card. So we're moving backwards. Close, before that we have the verbal. Before that, we have called the proposal or the contract stage. And here you're often negotiating terms. So before the close, you need them to say yes. Before yes, you're talking about some sort of contract or proposal you have. This is a good example of, for many of you, this is probably a really significant stage of your business. Potentially if you're running a consumer-oriented company, this stage may actually be trivial or non-existent. If you have a product where it's like, this is the defined product that we buy. You don't really negotiate. I was about to say cell phone contracts. Cell phone contracts are interesting because there's a little bit of action at this stage where you're deciding what plan you want, but you're not particularly haggling with your cell phone company over the terms in their contract. So for consumer products, this may be a short or a non-existent stage. Before that, a stage I'll call the demo stage. Again, often can be a long stage. I think of the key action here that you're trying to do is getting decision maker approval. And then before that, we have the qualifying stage. which is about qualifying fit. We talked about this last time, which is how do you qualify and actually figure out if someone is actually able to buy your product. Sometimes this will happen at the marketing stage, that actually everyone who comes out of marketing as a lead is already qualified for your product, or you're able to do the qualifying in marketing. Depending on your product, this might be where you're spending a lot of time. And then finally out here, this is the prospect stage. And I'll refer to these folks as the untouched, meaning you have some reason why they're in your system. You have some reason why you'd believe they might be able to be a sale. Maybe they're a lead that just literally no one has called yet. Just showed up in your inbox this morning and you haven't responded to it. At that stage, they're a prospect. So these are the rough stages of the funnel. I'll go through an example of it in a moment, but how would you think about, so this one's easy. How do you think about the amount of time you're going to spend, or what do I want to say here? I'm not going to do this hypothetical. Here's my rough rule of thumb, which is that you should be spending about equal amounts of time in every stage of the funnel as terms of your calendar time. So depending on your sales cycle, let's say your sales cycle is a year long, that over the course of a year, you want to spend about as much time working with people in the verbal stage, let's say it's like 1 man month, as you spend working with people in the qualifying stage. Very rough. My point on that is actually just a little bit the math, because which stage has more people in it? The verbal, the qualifying or the verbal? So qualifying is a lot more people. So what does that mean mathematically about how much time you're spending with each person?
Less time per person.
Yeah, so that the big reason why I say spend time equal in each bucket is just to remember that these folks deserve, every individual person in here, if this has 10 people in it, and this has 1,000 people in it, that these 10 people who are at the verbal stage are worth an enormous individual investment of time. They're worth the highest investment of time because they're the most likely to actually close. And a mistake that people can make is allocating time by number of people who are in each stage. So if I did this right, so let's do 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Those are more consumer-looking numbers, but that an idea of you're really going to be focused, at least per person, on much more here. And as every person gets more and more likely to buy, they get more individual time. That said, the other reason you look at a funnel is for the opposite mistake that can happen, which is you can spend all of your time here, and this is where you really need to be looking at the calendar, is you can spend all of your time here for 2 months or 3 months if you have a lot of people in this stage of the funnel. And if you do that, what happens? Let's say you spend 2-3 months only talking to people in this stage of the funnel.
So, I don't know.
Yep. Side, do you want to help her?
You negative everybody that they come in and you use them.
Yeah, so you spend all your time here, you don't neglect these people at all. You end up in a situation where at the end of 2 or 3 months, all of these people are cleared out of these stages of the funnel. And you have this backlog here that it takes 4 months to get them over to here, and you end up with this sales cycle that's whipping around really dramatically. There's issues of timing and what times of year and like when you have longer sales cycle. But you want to think about allocating time equally across them, both so that you make sure to focus on these people who are getting closed, but also that you're spending time out here so that you're moving people through constantly. So I'm going to go through two examples, but I just want to check in, ask any questions here at this stage. Yes?
What do you recommend you do if you have someone that's entered, say, the proposal stage
Yep.
and then goes stale?
Yeah.
Do you kick them back down?
Yep. So the rule of thumb that I learned is, actually, and this goes back to our principles, one of the things we talked about, which is the best thing we can get in sales is a yes. The second best thing is a no. And the worst thing is a maybe. So that the rule that I learned, and this is more from a sales manager point of view, is if the deal is not actively being worked, it is dead. And so you actually need to make a commitment of, is that deal actively being worked? And if not, that it's close lost. So you do want to be careful of letting people live in this, stage for a year. I would think of it as when you're just early stages, it's actually a mental orientation. Are you actively working them or not? Or have you put them aside for a year being like, oh, actually, here's the scenario. They said, check back with us in a year. If they said check back with us in a year, and you're not going to check, you're actually going to check back with them in a year, they are not an active deal right now. They are close lost, and you need some way to figure out how to re-engage them in a year, because I do think mentally, when people do that, you want to be thinking at the beginning of a year of them actually being back here. And that actually is the right mental way to think about it. Presumably you should be able to, actually, probably they can zoom right to here, hopefully. But you want to be thinking about starting from the beginning of the process. So it's somewhat a mental orientation of like, are you actively working it or not? But if you're not actively working it, it is not in your funnel. As with most of the classes in this series, part of building a sustainable business and moving out of the startup stage is actually about understanding what this is. Last time what we said is, when you understand qualifying and you really understand clearly what how to qualify a customer, that's when you can hire your first salesperson. Because that's when you can bring in a professional and you can say, these are the people who will buy our product. If you can find these people, you should be able to close them at a certain rate. So when you can qualify, you can hire your first salesperson. When you understand this, then you can start to grow a sales team. Because now you understand what it should look like across multiple people and what are the steps that people move through the funnel. Should be able to have some math as well about understanding if I hire people and get them a certain number of leads, they should convert at a certain rate over a certain period of time and yield certain dollars. What else?
Someone from the chat just
Yep.
commented that many eventual yeses start with a maybe, so maybe you can touch on that a
Yep.
little more.
Yep.
How to do that.
So I think maybe what might have actually come accidentally through on the chat is they said many start with a maybe, then become a yes. Is it may have sounded like, oh, if someone says maybe, I'm saying kick them out of the sales funnel. I am not saying that. I am saying that part of your job as a salesperson is to actually push people who are on that maybe line into a clear yes or into a clear no, and to not waste your time on the maybes. And so to actually be willing to spend more time pushing people towards yes or no in the sales process. And that if you're not working them, to mark them close lost. I was about to say don't be afraid to mark them close lost. You should be afraid. You're trying not to mark people close lost. You're trying to get them to sell, but to have the discipline to know that if you're not working them, they're not part of the process. So I want to talk about two different companies that I've worked for. I bring these up almost every class because I know them really well, and they give me a chance to compare two really different businesses. So those of you who've been here have heard many times about Testive, which was the company that I co-founded. It was a test preparation company. And the reason it's useful for this is so we sold test preparation, which usually lasts 2 to 3 months. The primary buyer was mothers, and the ticket price was like $1,000 to $1,500. So not like an app sale, but a consumer-oriented sale that was big enough to have, you had to talk to a salesperson usually to close the sale. And it didn't happen instantly. There was some time. So we go through on each one of these is to think about how long someone spent in that cycle and what was the key challenge in that cycle. And what I want you to note for different businesses how these timeframes vary, and what you're looking to figure out is what is the big issue and question that your prospect has at each stage in the funnel. Because we're going to have different questions at different stages in the funnel, and the better you can get at knowing what the questions are going to be, the better you can get at developing materials to anticipate them, and that's part of how you manage a larger sales force, is being able to be like, oh, at this stage you're going to have these problems, we have these materials or trainings to help you to deal with it. So at Testive, a prospect would come in the door and they would have to get a phone call from someone or they'd schedule a meeting. And this was generally about a week. We tried to get it down to as little as possible. It was largely based on how many salespeople we employed at the time. And our big challenge there was that they indicated interest and we called them. And so our big challenge was getting a hold of them. I assume many of you have challenges of getting a hold of potential prospects. What are some things that you do? I'm not looking for magic here, but just like what are some of the things you do when you're trying to get a hold of someone? Don't overthink it too much.
Well,
Yeah, we called them. So like the big activity that we had here was like you had to just be dialing a certain amount of time. We started setting an expectation for like if they're a prospect, they need to get their first phone call the same day the email comes in, and you need to be calling them every single day. Because our big challenge was just getting them on the phone. Then we would go to qualifying, which is we'd have a quick conversation with them and qualify them. Did they have budget? Were we actually talking to the parent or a student? What was the timing of when they were going to start out? If it was a freshman, it was too early for us to be able to sell them the product. So we had to qualify them. And this, the output of the qualifying, was for them to schedule a demo. Them to schedule a demo with one of our coaches. And so this was 2 weeks, mostly while scheduling. So we moved to a bunch of different challenges here. Instead of can we get a hold of the person, now we started getting the questions we think of as the sales questions. People's questions were, does it work? Let's see. And a big question people had here was timing. When should my students start? What's the right time? We had to push them to timing to try and generate urgency. So about 1 week here, about 2 weeks here. Demo, this was about 2 weeks they would tend to hang out in this stage. Between when the demo was scheduled and when we actually moved to this time frame here. And so this was the issues here was when we started to talk about people would start getting we got questions about pricing here, but people didn't tend to drop out at this stage because of pricing. They tended to drop out at this stage after seeing the demo and saying, yeah, I like it, but it's too much money. They tended to drop out here because of pricing. And yet again, for us, timing. When does my student start? Do we have time to do test prep right now? This stage didn't really exist at Testive. There was a price for a certain number of months of coaching. There were 3 different tiers of plan. There wasn't really negotiation on the terms of what the company did. And so this is an example of a stage. While it went through mentally, we didn't really spend any time there. Once they had the demo and decided whether they wanted to buy, they moved here. This was usually less than 1 day. And the primary challenge that we had here was getting the credit card number. And I'm trying to deliberately break it down to mechanical things, because it was the mechanical thing of someone said, oh yeah, we're ready to buy. And then we needed them to put their credit card number into the sales form on the website. Most of the reason why it happened in 1 day is they would generally say, yeah, we want to buy. We'd be on the phone with them. We'd say, hop on the internet, go to this page and purchase. And they would do it on the phone. So actually the way it looked is it tended to either be less than 1 day or it was multiple days and weeks. The average was less than 1 day, but it wasn't evenly distributed. Either they were doing it immediately or we were chasing them. And then we got to here. Hey. So, consumer cycle. Notice the time frames here on the order of weeks. Issues are actually pretty mechanical. I want to compare that to, and let me know if there's trouble getting this on the camera. The other major company that I worked at in sales was a company called Compete. And so at Compete, we sold market research. We looked at the online behavior of consumers across the internet, and we sold it to large companies that ran large websites who wanted to be able to compare traffic on their website to traffic against their competitors. The deals that we sold were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions. They were year-long contracts. We sold usually to people who led web teams, sometimes market research groups, but market research groups were usually reviewers who we tried to avoid as much as possible. And so different type of customer is an enterprise customer and way different pricing. So this is going to be greater than $100,000. And this was greater than $100,000 like 10 years ago, so even some of the timing on this might be different. So here for a prospect, people didn't have to come into us. We knew the companies we had good data on. We knew the industries we sold into. We knew who all the companies we wanted to target were. What was hard for us to find was sometimes a person. To get a person on the phone here, once we knew who ran their website, it would take 1 to 6 months. We knew someone who was the senior director of Verizon's online shopping site, and to try and actually get that person to talk to us was multiple months. Same problem, though, which was getting them on the phone. I'll quickly jump ahead. The way we addressed this problem at Testiv was we started making automated phone systems where people registered 4 times to call, and that way upped our ability to do this. Different customer, different solution. We would write deliberately inflammatory blog posts targeting specific companies where we would say Verizon's website is underperforming Sprint because Verizon deliberately does this thing wrong. We would always get on the phone with the prospect after that, where they would tell us that we were liars and our data was completely wrong and that it was both immoral and unethical for us to do what we were doing. And I would always be freaked out. It was like, and they would usually end with, we'd say like, oh, we sell market research. And they'd say, we are never going to work with you. Like, okay. It freaked me out. My boss was always so calm. And we'd get off the phone, I'm like, oh shit, they're never going to work with us. And he'd be like, wait 6 months. 6 months, generally usually it was somewhere between 1 to 2 quarters later, usually after they'd had a bad quarter, they would call us back up and say, we need your research for what we are selling here. So, couldn't be done in 1 week, but we figured out a process that would reliably get people on the phone. I don't know if I could ever replicate it. My boss there was so disciplined. That stuff just did not affect him. But qualifying was basically a non-stage. If we got the head of Verizon's website on the phone, we knew that they had budget. We knew the type of person that had the authority. We knew what the need and timing were for the things that we sold. So we weren't really qualifying in the sales process. The qualifying happened long before the sales process, just to be like, look, if you're in one of these companies, we know that you're basically qualified. So we moved very quickly to the demo, where we were talking about what our product was. What's the market research that we sell and how does it work? That was a 3 to 5 month process. Big things here were actually establishing the need, figuring out what is the need at this company which you would purchase this kind of research in order to buy, and another need, which was the budget cycle. For both of these, people would tell you, we can't afford it. But it was a different type of we can't afford it. For the consumer, in this case, the consumer we can't afford it was actually about whether or not we want to spend the money on this was the primary challenge we ran into. On this one, if we could show them the value, they were very comfortable spending the money. But the bigger problem we ran into more often was even if they wanted to, it was big enough they couldn't fit it in their current budget cycle. So the problem we more often ran into related to budget here was about the timing of the cycle and being able to get in the budget cycle. We had to figure out how could we short circuit that budget cycle for some reason, where could they pull money from, or did we actually have to wait for the official budget cycle? So once they decided they need it, like, yeah, we want this, we think this has value, then these proposals were completely customized. Completely customized. Pricing was totally different for every single person. What we offered was slightly different for every single person. So we'd be going back on proposal terms. We'd be going back and forth on proposal terms generally for about a month. If it was 1 week, it was spectacular. If it was 2 months, it was awful. And if it was 1 month, we're like, yeah, that's usual. The biggest challenge here was getting to the real decision maker. The process here was it always got stuck in legal. Legal was always reviewing it for an indefinite period of time. And we had to get the person who could actually make the decision to get on the phone with legal and say, we need you to review that contract. And that was Because legal would always be like you're in the queue. But it was very clear there was a queue, and at the top of the queue was whichever contract some decision maker within the organization had said, we need this reviewed now. So that was the only way you ever moved out of the bottom of the queue. And it would take us a month of pushing to do that. And then similarly, getting the signature this was super variable, but it was generally about a week. And this was usually about the real decision maker, although sometimes it was an unbelievably mundane conversation about how purchase orders get approved in their organization. And this was a time, this is still common but a little less common, where literally pieces of paper would tend to be ferried around the company. And so like you'd actually have to ask people like, they'd be like, oh, it has to go from legal to purchasing. And you actually had to figure out like, okay, no, like who in legal, do they email it to the person in purchasing? Do they walk it to the person in purchasing? Could you please go and move it from that person's desk to the next person's desk? And that was all of our energy. That was like all of our sales energy was just on trying to move this piece of paper around. Eventually sale. Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So,
Let's do
Yeah, yes, we're gonna have the mic run. Thank you for that.
So
Yeah.
just so I understand, so
Yeah.
you said that, for example, you do actually prepare the proposal for each client for like the second thing. But does this mean that the moment that you actually are done with the demo, that clock starts ticking and you get that in a month, or does that not include the preparation time that you guys make? Because like for me, it's going to be the same thing also when you go from proposal to the verbal. Then again, there's like this time when you finally get the decision. It will take them a week, but what's your time in between that?
Yeah. So the thing that I'm actually thinking about here is in your sales management. So it was when does these clocks start? So it's really in your sales management system. I think of this as sort of building this inside of a CRM. Is when are you? I'm going to work backwards here. The action is when do you change someone in your CRM from one to the other? The thing to think about then is mentally when have they moved from one to the other. To remember, at every stage, people are dropping out. So what you're really trying to do is, quite frankly, you're trying to push people to a clear yes or no at every stage so they're not hanging out there. At the highest level of discipline, once they say, we want a proposal, you are now in the proposal and contract stage. So the thing to think about that Saad's question talks about is, as you start to understand these stages in the funnel, and you start to understand what the primary challenges are in each one, you can start investing in systems that help speed up each one. So for example, I'm implying this from it, it's not quite what you said. It is possible that if you're doing super custom contracts, that this stage is a month, of which 2 weeks are the time it takes you and your organization to generate the proposal, because that's a really heavy thing for you. Actually, let's do it really extreme. You discover that on average, people spend about a month in this stage from when they say they want a proposal until when they give you the verbal. And you realize that 3 weeks of that month, you're preparing the proposal. And actually, people respond to you once they get the proposal in about a week. Part of the reason we have these funnels is then you can start to think strategically about, okay, one of the things that I want to do is I want to invest in a faster proposal system, for proposal generation system for my organization, because that's actually the thing that is sticking up this stage. There's both what's causing people to drop out of the funnel, and there's also what is preventing people from moving on to the next stage of the funnel. We ended up focusing all of our time here and here in this organization because of the dynamics of it. We were able to generate proposals in about a day. It was an all-nighter, but for this kind of a sales cycle where it takes you 12 months, when you actually get to the moment where someone says you want a proposal, you pulled the all-nighter because you're spending the 6 months when you're working on this. So we ended up spending all of our time here, and in particular here. And as you see these funnels, you can start to see places that you're going to invest. In Testive, actually, similar example, which was when we first built the company, we didn't have an online order form because we just started selling immediately, and people had to give us their credit card numbers over the phone. And so like when we were developing the websites, the developers were like, oh, we want to build all of these funnel features out here to schedule things. And we were like, no, the stage of the funnel that actually needs work is this one. We need a credit card checkout page. And it actually took some arguing, because they were like, but there's so many more people out here, and we spend so much more time working with people out here. And we were like, yeah, but anyone we lose, but if we can, well, I think what we showed them was we had an 80% close rate at this stage of the funnel. And we're like, we're pretty sure we can get it to 100% with credit card checkout. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. We will build and integrate that. What else? All right, we're going to go through and do this as a group. I would love, is someone willing to work this out with the group for your company? Would somebody be willing to walk us through the funnel for your company? As we said, part of an early stage company is that we are not totally sure what the funnel looks like, and that's part of what we're sort of figuring out. But who'd be willing to walk through this for us with theirs? And give us the quick background on what your company does, and we'll get you the microphone while that's happening. So yeah, just remind us, what do you guys do, and who do you sell to?
So we are producing and selling microorganisms.
Yep.
And our customers are the E&P companies, the oil and gas producers in the oil and gas industry.
Yep.
So they need our products to monetizing some of their natural gases currently stranded. So our microorganisms are converting those resources into something useful.
Yep.
But they need to invest in a facility, a modular system,
yep,
or a plant first. So there's a CapEx.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so just to go through the group. So they sell, there's these natural gas companies that have these byproducts that are not useful. What's the name of the company again?
It's GTL Biofuel.
GTL Biofuel sells microorganisms that convert some of those byproducts into useful products, but there's a significant capital expenditure for
It's
that.
not very significant,
Okay.
but there's some.
Okay, but there's a capital expenditure, and it has to go into their physical workflow process of how they're actually processing physical materials.
Yep.
So there's that work
So
on
our
it.
microorganisms is like a consumables. for
Yeah,
them.
got it. And give me a sense of like rough price range. We talking thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands?
So for a typical system, is like the revenue.
Yep.
The whole is like $5 million
Yep.
a year.
Okay.
And we don't have a pricing for our products.
Yep. But your product's going to be in the hundreds of thousands to millions, I said, as opposed to like, if it was $10, a bunch of these dynamics are driven by dollar value. So one of the quickest things you just saw is like, this cycle was a lot shorter than this cycle. A huge driver of that is just order of magnitude dollar value. So we're talking the hundreds of thousands of dollars here. So in terms of identifying prospects, how long does it take you to actually figure out and get someone into your sales processes like, oh, they could be interested, or they're a person who could buy?
Probably a month.
Yeah.
6 months.
Okay.
Everything.
Yeah. No, so notice one of these things, and a lot of these you'll actually find that we'll put up averages here, but there's a lot of these where often the real thing is either it happens immediately for some people, or there's this long tail of time for it. So it's often common, if you're saying to me like, usually a month, but if longer, often much longer. And what's the main challenge here? What's difficult at this stage?
The main challenge for the customer?
The challenge for the customer or you of actually just getting from there is an oil and gas company into you have someone on the phone.
Okay, they are quite conservative.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of safety concerns.
Yeah. So interesting. So you've actually jumped to this stage, which is a mental thing that we do. You've jumped to the stage where you're talking to them. Okay. I'm actually here at the stage of, there's an oil and gas do they approach you, or do you approach them usually?
Before, some of them approached us through some contacts, like our advisor or other people, and we haven't actively approached to customers.
All right. So what I actually want to argue here at this point, we're doing this, is that actually you jump right through this stage. Because if someone approaches you and they say, oh, we're interested, they've actually moved straight through to you're in the conversation qualifying them. As you think about growing your business and reaching out to companies, you'll have this phenomenon, which will be like, there's an oil and gas company that we haven't talked to. That who we think could buy. That's the prospect stage. But while people are approaching you, you actually jump right into qualifying.
Okay.
So let's say someone shows up to talk to you. That's the beginning of the qualifying stage. Between the showing up to talking to you and the serious conversations, how long do they usually spend in that stage?
I would say the qualifying stage is quite short, like a month.
Yep. Okay. See, I'm on the phone, and there's 1 month of figuring out, like, could this be a fit? And now you say, what's some of their pushback here? You said they're conservative, so what's some of the primary things they push back on?
Economics.
Okay, yep. So in terms of the value,
In terms of the efficiency of our technology
Like-
and the cost saving.
So ROI, or are you not talking pricing at this point?
We haven't talked about ROI
Okay.
to them, and because for a lot of customers our prospects, they have very good sense of technology.
Yeah.
They kind of can ask a very right question
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
about technology, the parameters.
All right, so they can jump right. So
Yeah.
they can jump right into. So I don't know. I'd suggest that maybe a thing to think about is moving them to ROI,
Okay.
and a thing you might consider. I'm going to come up with a zillion things you could invest in. You can't do all of them.
Okay.
So your decision to company. But a thing to think about here is mentally, would creating an ROI model, which might take an enormous amount of work, enormous, would that be worth it? And actually what you usually do is look at the funnel, figure out where people are getting stuck.
Actually, we have a financial model for
Yeah.
ROI, but it's very preliminary.
Yeah.
So I don't think they would trust our calculations,
Yep.
but they would give them a sense
Yeah.
of the.
All right. And the test for this one is, do you have a model that tends to push people into the next stage? And then to think about again is like, okay, you have a preliminary model. It's like, you can decide, do you want to invest in something more sophisticated or not? We'll take a look at it after this. But so they spend about a month here. They're mostly thinking about cost and sort of like, what's it going to cost them? And does the technology work? Is that it? Or is that more here?
In the demo stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were concerned.
Okay.
We're concerned, and then they asked us to send them some microorganism samples
Yep.
to test.
All right, so let's say, so I'm actually going to, I think, once they've sort of said, they've asked you to send microorganisms, I'm presuming you're only sending those to people who
Are you interested?
who are interested and qualified to be able to buy. Okay, so now we're in the demo stage where it often involves sending microorganisms. How long does this stage last?
It'll take a little bit longer.
Yep.
Because first they need to use set up a very small apparatus to test the microorganism.
Yep.
And then you need to figure out how to build a larger facility themselves. One way is to hiring an engineering design company. The other way is using our partners
Yep.
for doing that. So that'll take some time. I would
Yeah.
say 3 months.
Yeah, okay. So 3 months. If you found that a lot of people were dropping out at this stage of the funnel, or you wanted to do it, so things to invest in would be, can we speed up the testing process?
Okay.
Can we speed up the design process? I'm proposing things that potentially, I'm sort of talking about like, what if you were to put enormous resources into this? And you're only going to do that if you think it's really going to unlock a stage in some way. Okay, so they spend about 3 months here. And then for the folks who do move on, who say, okay, we actually want to talk to you about a specific deal at the proposal contract stage, how long does that take?
For our side, I think 1 month is the maximum to formulate a proposal,
Yep.
a contract for them.
Yep.
But I don't know how long it would take for them to,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Have you had anyone go to
No,
this
we
stage?
haven't.
Yeah, okay, so you haven't had anyone go to this stage. So this is really interesting. You're in a question mark here. We know it's greater than 1 month
Yeah, definitely.
because we know that's the time on your side. Up to we're not sure. And so part of the discovery of this business is going to be is this something we can do in 6 months, or is this usually a 12-month thing? Are there different companies depending on where they are in stage?
No, we
Okay,
haven't.
yeah.
We have people in the demo, but we haven't converted those people to that stage.
Cool. Let's jump into someone else, someone who's in the someone talking to us about their proposal contract stage, things like that. Who'd be willing to? I guess we had questions first. With the
Yeah, I had a
question?
question.
Yeah.
Just curious, we do, in our company, we close on a proof of concept, so we go in and do a preliminary testing that's
Yep.
a certain amount of money, and then we want to close on a larger one. So would that proof of concept be one funnel, and then going into, after you close that, they would go into the next, or
Yeah.
would you consider that all like the demo?
I think this is a case where you would think about having more stages in your funnel. So very common here, very common, I'll split this out actually not as a different funnel, but as its own, is that many people have a different demo process. So your demo process might actually involve like proof of concept, like contract, like POC execution, and then hopefully you can maybe get them right to proposal after that. But this is rough stages. It is very possible based on how you sell your product that it'll be different, especially those of you with physical products. And thank you, proof of concept's a great example of a thing where it's like, oh, you might have a two-step demo process. It might be like an initial demo with someone, and then there might be a proof of concept process. I would try to mentally think of it as all on the journey to this. But if you have a particularly large proof of concept process, it can sometimes make mental sense to break them out into two different sales and to break it out through like, especially if the proof of concept generates revenue. Mm-hmm. If it does it generate revenue for you?
Yes, it does.
And how long does it last?
Oh gosh, I think 6 months.
All right. And is the revenue meaningful from it?
That
Meaningful in this, okay. So the other test that I was mentally using is if the proof of concept revenue is meaningful enough that you're like, actually this makes an impact on the burn rate for our company if we sell more proof of concepts, then I would be more willing to think of that as its own sales stage. Because if your proof of concept is completely free, then I'd be really scared about a 6-month proof of concept because it's even more clear you're definitely not at a sale at the end of the proof of concept. So you've added 6 months onto your process here. And if you're doing it a free proof of concept that takes 6 months, I'd be thinking a lot about like, ooh, do you want to reconfigure your sales cycle to get rid of a proof of concept? Because now, if it's 6 months in the middle of this. So mentally, I sort of mentally divide it based on like how much of a sales process it feels like and how significant the revenue is.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in our case,
Yeah.
the demo stage, probably the prospect or potential customer need to invest a little bit in the apparatus to testing our microservice. Will that be a deal breaker, or is there? Do we need to think something special solution for facilitating this process?
Yeah. So do you need to think of a special solution for it? And it's like, and this is part of why you want to start mentally breaking this out. Because one of the things you want to start mentally doing is seeing, do most of our deals stop at the demo stage? So you do a couple of things. You're like, are most people or you need to push yourself to close lost if the deal's not moving. If you have the discipline to do that, you'll start to see, oh, most people are dropping out of the funnel here. I'm hypothetical. Let's say most people are dropping out here. All this model is designed to do is to get you to realize they're dropping out here. Then what you do is you say, okay, what is happening here to drop people out, and what can we do about it? So for example, if you find that most people are dropping out the demo stage because they don't want to invest money in the testing apparatus, then you might be like, we might, as part of our sales process, need to fund or either fund their testing process or have some way to speed it up for them. You could imagine a totally different version of this where people were dropping out of the demo process because they didn't believe the microorganisms were effective because they didn't do the test correctly.
Yeah.
That would be a different solution than if they're dropping out because they don't want to invest the money in the equipment for the test. And so what it gets you to do is to look deeper in here to get you to try and analyze the root cause. Then when you have the root cause, that's what determines what the right solution is. So part of this is just to help you focus in. And so the answer really depends on why you're losing people at that stage. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So in my case, I usually I figure out how to get the prospect on the phone.
Yep.
Then we have the meeting.
Yep.
And at the end of the meeting, they'll ask for a proposal with the contract.
Yep.
So it's like, for me, it's like, basically it's like kind of like a skipping the demo, because I think the demo, that what happens during the meeting.
Yep.
But the challenge then is when you send the proposal of what you want to do and the pricing, and then you send the contract with it, that's where I see people drop.
Yeah.
So is there another step? Because for me it's also even the proposal and the contract, they're like pilots. So I think they mentioned for silver thread. So I consider that a different than the whole cycle.
Yeah.
But I still see that people do drop in the proposal contract stage. So is there another? Do I really need maybe a demo in between to get them hooked?
Yeah, so we have an issue where a lot of people seem to be dropping the proposal and contract stage. Diagnosing this is has potentially a bunch of different issues. I want to talk about a couple of signals that you should look for. If, at an extreme, 100% of people move from this stage to this stage, and then they drop here, either this is not a real stage in your process, which is possible but unusual. And if it's 100%, it actually suggests that people are actually dropping at this stage. And I'm looking to you as I'm going to say this to you is and you're not being disciplined about making them commit to a yes or no. So if a lot of people are moving here, what it suggests to me is that they don't want to say no, and so they're saying send me a contract as a way of saying no. And so that suggests to me you want to spend more time here. What was the language that I had? Some language that is if I send you a contract, so often it's things like, look, I want you to feel comfortable saying a yes or a no. It's going to take me a lot of time, or not actually, you don't have to say it'll take me a lot of time. It's it takes energy on my part to prepare a proposal. If I create a proposal, I want to make sure that it's something that you can say yes to. What would you need in there to say yes? And to not be afraid in that conversation to potentially say it sounds like this isn't a fit for you. To eventually remember, as painful as it is, still better to get the no before writing the contract and chasing them down. So if 100% of people are moving through, maybe this isn't a real stage, but that's more a sign that actually people are people should be being closed lost here, and that there's some issue in that. We have one in the back, then we'll come up here.
Hi, I'm Satya, and
Satya.
I'm from Tulip Interfaces. We do software for manufacturing.
Yep.
And so I'm on the free trial team.
Yep.
And so people sign up for our platform, and then they could potentially send me some stuff, and then I would build their process flows in Tulip. So directly at the demo stage, and I think sometimes what I have trouble with is figuring out on that first call if they're a yes or a no.
Yeah.
And then that first call becomes a second call, and maybe a third call, and then it becomes a yes or a no.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, kind of what we need to focus on. And kind of like what you said, our sales funnel is a little bit different in the sense that we do, they become nurturing and then sales qualified.
Yep.
And then become an opportunity if we send them a quote or not. But yeah, well, I guess some questions for you is what are some things, I know you talked about it earlier, but how do you get someone to say yes or no in that demo itself?
Yeah, so a couple of things here, because you have a sales flow which we talked about how these dynamics change. When it's $1,000 sale versus $100,000 sale, time changes a lot based on dollar value. Also, number of people changes. So there's a couple of things you said in there about people sign up for free trials. I don't know what your volume's like, but this whole process also looks different if this is 100,000 people and that stage is 10. If you're trying to run a lot of people through these stages, then you either want to think about what are ways that you can qualify people earlier on in the process, or are there questions you can get to figure out, are these people actually qualified, so that maybe a bunch of people get their Tulip demo, or a bunch of people get an automated demo, but actually only this subset of people gets calls or follow-up calls in it because we know that they're qualified. So one way is to get qualification out here earlier. The other way is to try and automate more. So if you want to get a bunch of people into free trial, and actually The other thing is to think about just trying to turn that more into a marketing process and not necessarily having a person in there. So maybe you're doing it because it's an early stage in the business. And what I would be thinking about for that is what you look at is usually who are the people who emerge the other end having bought? What do those people have in common with them? And then how do we put questions or barriers in the process earlier that filter out the people who aren't likely to buy? So if you're like, I'm trying to think of one that we would do on this. Well, or a thing might be is like, this is not how you've constructed it. But I have seen ones where in workflow products, you know that people are much more likely to buy if they set up a workflow in your product themselves. So people do things like intervening with do two things, either helping people try to set them up, or if someone sets one up, put all of your sales energy on that person. If you have a thing where you have, I guess what I'm going to do is suspect there's a person too early in the process, which long term you might want to get rid of. So I think I'm actually pushing you as it seems to me as like, right now you have a person setting people up, that you want to think about your job as actually being, how do I automate this?
Yeah.
How do I automate this so that people are only talking to well-qualified prospects? Because if you're spending a lot of energy on people who frankly aren't qualified, that's a great job for automation. It's not a great job when you have a human in it. You'll never be efficient, and humans are too expensive.
Currently, we use Calendly.
Yeah.
So people can book an onboarding session with us.
Yeah. What I'm wondering is are all of those people who are booking onboarding sessions, are those qualified prospects?
Yeah, that's pretty manual.
Yeah. So what I'd be thinking of is at the beginning, you're going to do it really manual at the moment, and that part of what you're thinking of is starting to be like, okay, I am seeing what the picture of a qualified prospect looks like, and then now can we build tools where somehow there's a filter that only people who appear qualified actually get on a Calendly onboarding appointment with you.
Right. Nice.
Cool, thank you. One more up here.
Thanks. I think somebody mentioned about paying or not paying for the pilot stage.
Yep.
I have that question. We've gone through that stage,
Yeah.
but I still have that question.
Yeah.
Basically, let's say that if your product is at a beta 0.9, 0.95, probably makes sense to charge,
Yeah.
right? But if you're at 0.5, 0.6, in many cases you still wanted to pilot
No.
to understand the need, right? In this case, it seems like it's pretty hard to charge. Personally, I feel like you don't want to be charging customers the money.
Yeah.
Although some advisors tell me that you still should try,
Yeah.
because it shows how serious they are. And then the third opinion that I heard I thought was really good is they don't call it a pilot stage, they call it a product confirmation stage, which is to clearly define the goal of what
Yeah.
needs to become out of the pilot, then define how to roll out
Yeah.
after that if you achieve the goal.
Yeah.
So my question to you is basically, what have you seen
Yeah.
and what are the right approaches to handle this before you get to beta 0.9?
Yeah. So I'm going to repeat what a lot of your advisors say, which is similar here, which is the critical thing if you're doing pilots and proof of concepts, that you want to be clear, am I doing this for revenue to fund the company, or am I doing this as part of a sales process? If you're doing it as revenue to fund the company, you have to charge. Because that's actually part of the way that you're funding the company is by having people pay for proof of concepts. If not, and somewhat even regardless, is that these things are part of a sales process, and your goal is to use them to get people to buy more. What's critical there, and this is true in all the sales process, we haven't talked about this part of it yet, but is getting people to define early on what are the criteria by which they would buy and commit to them early for you. Because what will happen if you don't do that, let's go do a pilot and see if it turns out well. And if you don't determine what well is, I guarantee you, it's a human thing that when you get to the end and you look at the results, people will say, well, it could have been better. Because of course humans will do that. So you have to set up out here, what are the criteria? And I would not be afraid to be quite clear of my goal is for this product to be valuable to you. and you to roll it out to your whole organization. And people will nod because they're like, of course that's your goal. Like that's a reasonable goal for you to have as the person owning this company. Like my goal is for you to roll this out to your whole company. What would you need to see to do that and to push those to as concrete metrics as possible? And if they are impossible, two things. Let people define what they are, and then it's your job to reach them. If they're truly impossible, then maybe it's not worth doing the proof of concept, but they're usually not. They're usually just very hard. And okay, it's like your goal to meet those very hard objectives. I assume in this is like people say to you, like, oh, we would do it if it met these thresholds of like costing this little and having this level of effectiveness. And they might have numbers that are really hard of like, needs to be this low in cost and this high in effectiveness. But I still think it's better to have those. And even if you end up here and here, you might still have a deal. And if you end up lower in cost and higher in performance, you'll definitely have a deal. But if you don't set the goals, then wherever you end up, people are going to be like, oh, it could be more. So set goals for it really clearly. And then I'm of the advisor thing, which is part of what you're testing in a pilot is people's willingness to buy. If people aren't willing to spend money on it, then they're not willing to buy it. With an exception for cheap products. I feel really differently about the app on your phone that you have to use, or the products where using them makes them more valuable, which is why workflow products will often do a free trial because once you've put it into your workflow, now it has value to you because it's really hard to get out. Proof of concepts don't usually have that phenomenon. They don't usually have the phenomenon where using it puts it so deep into their workflow that they can't get it back out again. So I'm really skittish about free trials for things where I think we think it makes it easier to sell, and I'd actually argue that it makes it harder for you to sell because it requires you to deal with a lot more people in this stage than are actually well qualified for the product.
We have a question from the chat.
Yeah.
When is it the time to start managing a funnel, and how many data points are needed to start speculating on patterns?
Yep. All right. So, time to start managing the funnel. Let's do two things. Time to start thinking from a funnel point of view is immediately. So start thinking about just like, what are these stages and how would I break these things down to stages? Just have your mind going on that. This is a totally unscientific Miro's rule of thumb. My rule of thumb is once 5 people get here, you can start having hypotheses. You probably actually have better hypotheses here about qualifications. This is actually where you start figuring out like, okay, here's what the qualifications are for this. But at least 5 people before you can really even take a stab at what this is. For the first 5 people, you're just doing whatever you can. Then I think the next one is, as you get to a professional salesperson, this is a thing you should be able to push a first salesperson to do. Because this is something sales professionals should know. And the first person you're likely to hire as a sales professional is going to be a combination, probably player coach. So probably both going to sell, but you also want them to help build a sales team. It should be someone who knows how to do this. So you really start thinking about this in detail once you've gotten your first professional salesperson in. So start thinking about it immediately, because where people drop off and how long they take in each stage is going to inform where you put your energy. You don't really get formal about this until you have a professional salesperson, because this is how you start managing them. Is that you start managing them by making them be really disciplined about where each deal is in the funnel, and you'll start having ideas of like, oh, a tested, I'd say like 80% of people went from this stage of the funnel to this stage of the funnel. At Compete, 100% of people went. That's why we just decided it wasn't a stage. If fewer than 90% of people don't move from this stage to this stage, you have an actual problem with your salesperson, in that like they're not, either there's something very weird going on, like you need a credit card checkout page, or you actually have like a professionalism problem. And then the big thing that you're trying to figure out is in here, which is all we've been talking about here, because these I've made really generic. and they're not actually generic at any individual organization. They're actually very much customized to yours. So it's a long answer for timing, but this is a thing that firms up over time. I will say you have to have it firmed up before you start building multiple salespeople, because you need this to manage multiple people.
A question? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So does the startup company should hire the first sales professional who are capable of building a sales team? That's my question.
All right. I brought this question on myself, which is, should your first sales professional be capable of building a sales team? We're moving into sales management. What's the answer here? Look, the person you want to hire for your first sales professional is the person who's a tremendously good individual salesperson and can build a sales team. That's great. Those people are really expensive. So those people are either really hard to find, if you can find them, are really expensive, or you end up with someone who's never done it before or who's only done one part of it before and turns out to be great. But the managing a sales team and the being a salesperson are such different jobs, it's very hard to find the person who straddles both. I'm going back and forth because it's really hard to find the person who straddles both, and if you're a startup, that's what you should be looking for. So my answer is, yeah, you should try to hire the person who can do that. If I had to err on the side of one, I would err on the side, I would not do someone who's only one or the other. I would err on the side of someone who knows how to sell rather than someone who knows how to build a sales team. Because if you have someone who knows how to sell, you can be selling things, though you won't have built a sales team. If you have someone who knows how to build a sales team but can't sell anything, they will hire 5 people, and it's not clear any of them will know how to sell anything, and you'll be 6 months and $500,000 in the hole on all of these salaries. So if you have to err towards someone who knows how to sell, and then you can hire the other person later.
So what would happen, for example, we hire a salesperson, but who is not capable of building the team, but afterwards we hire a person, very high-level person who can build a team.
Yeah. All right. So what happens if you do it in this order? What will happen, almost guaranteed, is you will hire a salesperson who knows how to sell. Your first salesperson will be, the technical term is a cowboy, which is someone who works for a startup who hasn't had any prior salespeople because they like to do whatever they like to do, and they do not like being told by anyone else what is required of them. So you'll hire your first person, who will be a cowboy. You will bring on a sales manager. Those two people will come into conflict, and the first salesperson will leave your company. And I usually don't say things like, this is definitely going to happen, but that's like as close to predictions as like, I have always seen it happen that way. The best version of it is the first salesperson sticks around for, depends how long your sales cycle is, but like roughly 1.5 sales cycles. So if it's a year sales cycle, they stick around for a year to 18 months. And they get to the point where they're like, nah, and you're able to transition them out well. That's the good version of that. I've never seen a first salesperson stay through the growth of the company unless they become unless they're one of those people who does both and becomes the sales leader. Very rare. Other people have had same or different experiences. I'll take that as rough things. Marcus.
I'll do a follow-up question here. So a follow-up question to the topic about data points for a funnel.
Yeah.
So they're asking here, in the case where they have they're pursuing multiple industries, trying to figure out their product market fit.
Yeah.
Do you aggregate all that data to figure out what your funnel should look like?
Yeah.
You keep it separate, not to confuse things? Yeah.
When you're in the product market stage, I just want you to mentally have this orientation so that you're not completely lost. You can't really build this in the product market fit stage. My 5 rule of thumb is maybe better for product market fit, which is like at the beginning, you just pursue any customer that you can. And then once you have like 5 customers, you should start seeing some patterns. You should start seeing some things that are in common between people, and then you start to zoom in. So at the product market fit stage, don't worry about this. just have it in mind, know that it's where, we're doing this because you'll know that it's where you're headed. But at product market fit stage, you're just doing anything you can to get anybody to be buying. All right. So one of the things we were talking about over in this group was the idea that these stages, it's easy to try and frame them based on what you do as a company, but that you actually want to be framing them with respect to what is the mental state of the customer. So for instance, I think the one we talked a lot about was moving from demo to proposal contract. I'm intending to mean that as this happens when there's a mental change in the customer from I am evaluating this product to let's talk about the terms under which we would buy this. And that's actually a mental stage. And not to define these as stages in your company, because that's when you get funnels that have things, we were talking about this, like contract generation. Because that's a thing you do internally. Nothing has mentally changed at the customer during that stage. And you want to be using these to figure out like, oh, where can I get them faster, or where can I pull out time? And so by putting contract if the customer has said and committed to wanting a contract, that your time and the cost for that goes in here. What else came up in people's groups or that people noticed that they want to share? And I'll try to run the mic. I'll try to run the mic around for this one.
There's a couple more questions on the chat.
All right, so we'll do a couple in the room
get
here,
to them.
and then we'll come to chat.
So we do a similar pipeline to yours, except
Yep.
that the demo and the qualifying are sort of reversed.
Yeah.
We have a simple product, we send it out to healthcare providers, they test it on their patients,
Great.
they love it.
Yep.
And then we spend a lot of time trying to work our way up the chain
Yeah.
of command to find the champion that's going to say, okay, we can buy it,
Yeah.
or we want it. So the question that came up really is, especially because you talked about 1 to 6 months of to get on the phone for your second company, are we wasting our time sort of working our way up the ladder?
Yeah.
Or should we be approaching higher, but there's sort of more risk and more
Yeah.
demonstration required
Yeah.
to get to that
Yeah.
point?
All right, so we sort of, this comes to the agent, one of the age-old sales goes, we start from the bottom and work our way up, or should we start from the top and work our way down? I'll get to that, but first that I do want to say, which is that these are very generic stages, and you want to adjust them for your organization. And I want to just call it the way you framed that, which was right, was like, oh, since we have something that demos so easily, and it sounds like doesn't cost you a ton to demo, we just get that into their hands, and that if they show up, then we qualify them afterwards, which makes sense if your product is easy to demo, or you've invested in easy demo. The other thing you could think about doing if you want to do that is invest in building a really easy demo that can do that. Some industries it's just not even possible by the laws of physics and mechanics, but it is an option. So this is always an age-old question. Should I start from the bottom up or work from the top down? What the general thing you'll get from sales professionals is they'll basically tell you to always start from the top down, and that always is going to have all the benefits that you've talked about. I'll add the caveat, it's not usual that demoing a product is so easy. So the way people do those, so things you can do. Could do both simultaneously. One of the things it sounds like you're doing is waiting for the demo to go well and then working the way up the chain. One possibility is to be doing both simultaneously all the time, and just whichever one hits first, great, and they're reinforcing each other if the demo is really cheap. The other thing that I've seen people do is if there is some value that, or actually I'll give a specific one. This product initially was, I am blanking on the name of it. It was a sales product. It was a Gmail plugin. This was years ago, these are not automated, but where you could automatically create your own templates. So when you were sending emails out to people, it was a Gmail plugin where you could load in your own templates and really quickly fill in the name of the customer or the prospect. So while you were calling people, you could load up the email, fill in the template easy, just fill in that. What they did was they demoed that for free. As an individual user, you could do that for free. They would get organizations where they would go to the sales managers and say, look, a bunch of people in your organization are using this. But critically, there was a feature that they would not unlock without paying for, which was that you could not share your templates across multiple people without paying for the product. And they were very deliberate then in their demo about what functionality was usable and what functionality had to be unlocked. And so they made the functionality that was valuable to the buyer something they had to pay for. So they would go and say, look, your sales team is using this product to set up a bunch of templates, and they're all using their own individual templates, which no sales manager wanted. They want you using the company templates. So the long answer to that, I think, is go in on both. And as you get to this and you customize these for you, to potentially think strategically, are there features in the product that maybe aren't part of the demo that would be valuable to those higher up in the organization people that you're only going to do if they call you? So like, oh, there's these things that you want it to do. We are happy to show you that or let you use that if you bring us in or if you let us talk to this person. I'm being really abstract because we haven't talked about. Yeah, that's it. Darn. But that's the mental framework. Is what are there things that are value for at higher levels? But I would think about both if it truly is that cheap to be able to send in and demo. The reason most people don't do that is just because it's expensive to demo. If you have to get a salesperson on the phone, it's expensive. If you have physical products, it's expensive.
Yeah, I guess I had a quick question as well, which is, so my company sells data, and we have a similar pipeline
Yep.
as, you know, your process and everything. Yep. But in recent months or so, we've had a lot of discussions about making it self-service, meaning like a process similar to Slack, where, you know, when you're on Slack, right? I've never talked to a salesperson on Slack before, and I have like three or four different Slack channels that accounts, I guess. So, you know, kind of making it as self-service as possible and avoiding the, you know, basically getting rid of a bunch of those stages there. We're, you know, going to try to spend a lot of time to put the demos online, for instance, and they can just self-demo themselves. Have you seen kind of pros and cons of trying to automate that process?
Yeah, so this is where we actually speak to, I'm not a very good person to speak to that. My background is in sales, which I sort of define as those one-to-one processes. I'll give you the obvious ones that you know. Salespeople are expensive. If you can get people to or to go through a process that doesn't involve a salesperson, it's cheaper. Salespeople are more flexible. They can answer questions, they can smooth over issues, they can articulate to you, to the customer, what the value of the product is, even if the customer can't see it immediately. And so what you need to think about doing is, in general, when people move to more of a marketing funnel, there's a whole set of dynamics I don't understand super well. The one value that I can give you from sales is to really look carefully at your sales conversations, understand really carefully what, this is really helpful because understanding why people are dropping at different stages of the funnel, like what are the reasons why people fail to move on, and how you can build it into the product to provide responses to those challenges at different stages. I'm trying to think of an example of this. I don't have a great one on Slack. I will tell you on Asana, there's messaging in the product about connecting you to other people in the organization that like pops up and tries to explain to you the value of working with other people in the organization. And that's an example pretty clearly of something a salesperson would be able to do really well, which is like ask you questions and explain to you how this product changes when you're working across multiple people, that Asana has tried to work into the product itself to ask them. Separately, I should say, Asana has started emailing me, their salespeople have started emailing me because I have like five, it's super clear. I like added my 6th person to my Asana team that I started assigning tasks to, and I clearly triggered some sort of sales tripwire at 6 people on it, because then I started getting the emails about like adding more members of your team. So they're doing both in that case, but thinking about how you figure out really clearly why people are dropping and build it into the product. It's really hard, and it's honestly not my training because I'm just used to like, oh, you have people who can answer any question anytime. What else do people notice or come up? Do we have ones from online?
Yeah, so we gotta.
It's related to sales.
Right. So from online, 2 questions. What are the best tools for sales pipeline management and for what stages they work best.
Yep.
I used Pipedrive and Excel.
Yep. So what are the best tools? So CRM tools or sales management tools, there are many of them on the market. Different ones are good at different things, and I'm not up to date on the specific one. Obviously, Salesforce is sort of the current market leader. I will say it's not. They've changed the product. It tends to be better for startups now. Almost everyone goes there at a certain stage because it's the only one that works at a certain magnitude. The more important thing when you have multiple salespeople is not so much what tool you're using, but is about the discipline of using the tool and being disciplined about making everyone note what stages people are in the funnel. I've basically seen it in almost every organization I've been into. You had to tie people's bonuses to it or essentially refuse to accept information that didn't come via the CRM system in order to get people to update it. So it would be things like people would be like, oh, we just got a verbal from so-and-so. And you'd have to be like, no, you did not, because it does not say that in the CRM. And they'd be like, but I just got off the phone. But if it is not in the CRM, I will not accept that as fact. It's the only way I've seen people manage it. So there are different tools. I don't know them super well. What's more important is that people have the discipline to use them. You have anything else from online?
Right, so there's one more question here.
Yep. Do one more from online and then one more in person, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah. So this relates to tools, where to study sales, where can we read or hear more about tools such as sales funnels and best practices? Any suggestions, general suggestions, recommendations, books, other resources?
Resources. It's hard to find really good mechanical resources. So in terms of training the tactics, it generally requires workshops. It's a really hard thing to read about in a book without getting some degree of practice on it. So different sales trainers. A couple of big ones that I know of are Sandler is one of the major training. There's one called Spin Selling that I've heard a lot of people speak really highly of. And then there's, unfortunately, there's just a bunch of different sales training ones. I'd say those are actually the two that I run into the most. Do you have other resources?
So I would say come to these sessions. There'll be more in the spring. We do Sandler here actually. I've done the training. It's good, but you're getting very similar content here and the ability to sort of very interactively engage with Miro. It's free. Sandler is pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So
they're hard skills to learn without practice.
They have a subreddit for sales and it's been chatted.
Yeah, so it's a subreddit for sales. What's the name of the, do you remember the name of the subreddit?
It's called sales.
Sales. Okay, so the sales subreddit. Yeah, that would actually, thank you. I'm going to start sharing that with people, as Reddit generally is when I think of good resources. All right, any last comments or questions from in the room? All right, cool. Thank you all for joining today. As I said, we talked about qualifying, sort of once you can figure out how to describe the customer that will buy, that's when you can think about hiring a professional salesperson. This is further on in the process. This is once you can nail down these things and understand where people drop off, what percentage of people go through the funnel, you can think to start to hire a sales force because you can manage them. It's not something that you'll spend a lot of time on up front, but it is something to really be thinking about and just have this mindset to start thinking of your sales process as a funnel. The more discipline that you can have on this idea that people are moving through a funnel, the easier it's going to be for you to pinpoint what is and is not working in your sales process. So I got a few minutes to stick around here. I'll be up front to answer questions. Thank you all for staying the whole time. It's always a pleasure to come out and do these, and we will see you again. When's our next one?
February 25th.
I'll see you again on February 25th. Thanks so much, everyone.